Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So as everyone probably knows, maybe actually not everyone knows, but we're underway in another federal election campaign. And so I wanted to reach out to young ladies that I respect. She has slightly different political views than mine, which makes for interesting conversation. I've had a good couple of conversations with her over the years. She worked at one point in time in Doug Ford's leadership provincially, and as a senior communications advisor. She's been a co-host of TV and radio shows. She's been an executive director of telecom market research. She's got a BA from Carleton University. She's got a diploma from Seneca College of Applied Arts and Technology. She has been, for the last 10 years, running a company, Globacon Research, that specializes in trying to figure out who you're going to vote for, and contacting us through digital means. She does polling and things like that. So she's got a ton of knowledge of politics, of the way that one does politics. And she actually ran in the last election federally, didn't win, but put forward an incredibly hard-fought campaign. And frankly, I'm shocked that you're not running again, because you did such a great job. And you were so competitive last time, and it's a disappointment that you're not putting your name forward again this time. But who knows? Maybe they'll call upon you sometime in the next little while. So, Ramona Singh, welcome to our show.
Great to be here, Brian. It's nice to join you. I'm so used to saying great to have you on when I host things, so it's nice to be a guest. Absolutely. And that was a great intro. I don't think I realized all of that work that I did in such a short period of time until you just read it out.
Oh, well, it's great work, and you've got good experience. So we're under a federal election, you know, we've got a pandemic. We got potentially a fourth wave. We've got issues regarding mask mandates and vaccine mandates potentially, or vaccine passports. People were heckling all the different leadership candidates in the last couple of days. Getting the vote out is going to be a challenge, and that's what you specialize in. What do you think the parties need to do to try to get their vote out?
Absolutely. It is a challenging time, to say the least. I work with local campaigns. I'm currently working with many candidates, and what we're doing is we're doing voter ID calls for them. We're doing them in multiple languages, so not just English, but what their constituencies need. If they have a big, base in a specific community, we reach out to them. We are trying to identify voters for them to see who their supporters are. And it's necessary at this time, right? Because a lot of these candidates have been in place a very short period of time, or if they've been nominated earlier, it's just been hard for them to find volunteers. It's been hard for them to fundraise, they're saying, because of, I guess, the, COVID, economic, political climate. So it's been quite challenging. So what I say to candidates, I say, listen, you have a short campaign. Yes, we did know that Justin Trudeau could potentially call an election this year, but, having him call it on the 15th of August, essentially what I'm telling candidates is take a look at the polls that, your party won in, or you did most favorable in the last election, in the last few elections. Go to those polls, which are voting polls, right? There's houses. So what we have is we have databases of, the addresses in certain polling locations, and go and reach out to them, because they're your supporters. You want to be able to get them on board to see if you still have them. And it's all about strategy now, right? It's all about what you're going to do with the short period of time that you have in terms of meeting people who are going to support you. I tell them,
listen, you have a shorter period of time. You're going to identify some people that aren't going to want to go to the polls. You've only got a couple of days of advanced polling. We do have mail-in ballots, but the mail-in ballots have to be in, I think, by like September the 14th or something like that. So to actually get people to vote is going to be a challenge. How are you going to persuade people to vote? Even if you identify them through your telephone calling, how are you going to get them to vote?
So one of the biggest things that Elections Canada said this year is that last election, 50,000 voters did mail-in ballots out of the 18.5 million voters. This election, they're estimating that it might be about 5 million mail-in ballots. So part of the strategy is, I tell candidates, when you're at the door, if they're interested in mail-in ballots, fill out the form for them online, right? Get them to register on the spot so they can get their mail-in ballot on time. And you're just going to have to run a strategy where you are following up with people who said they're going to do their mail-in ballot. Because, you know, yeah, you're right. There's 4 days of advance voting. I think it's September 10th to the 13th. And then there's election day on September 20th. And I just can't imagine if somebody pulls up to, let's just say, a community center, they see a lineup around the building, 2 meters apart, you know, everybody lined up. You're not going to wait in that, right? So your best shot is get those 4 days of advance polls and get people to do their mail-in ballots, special ballots, people who are not in the country. As we know, there's a flight ban for India, for example, and other places where people haven't been able to travel back to Canada. So, I mean, those are some of the other strategies. It's going to be very challenging, but I do question what the voter turnout's going to be. So in the last 2 elections, 2019 and 2015, it was about 68% voter turnout of eligible voters. So I wonder what this election's going to be like, if we're going to have such a high voter turnout or not, and what that would mean for the parties that are running.
So in the last 2 elections, high voter turnout meant that Trudeau won the majority, and then lower voter turnout meant that he lost the majority and got a minority. And so the statistics are, and you probably know this better than I, but if the same number of people showed up at the polls in what was it, 2015, as showed up in 2011, that based on the statistics, Stephen Harper would have won. And so Stephen Harper won in 2011, a majority government. The vote went up dramatically with ethnic people and with young people, and in urban centers. And based on that, those were the places where Trudeau won the majority. And then that vote went down in 2019, and Trudeau only won a minority. So what do you think? With a lower voter turnout, if it's young people that don't show up, if it's ethnic people that don't show up, if it's urban center people that don't show up, that could cost Trudeau big time. And you know, well, you talk about those dates, the 11th to the 13th being the advance polls. That's less than a month from now. So we've got the shortest campaign that the law allows. And if people aren't going to be hanging around for election day, they're going to vote in the advance polls. That's 3 weeks from today. It's 3 days after Labor Day. It's going to be, you know, a lot of people don't think people are going to start paying attention until after Labor Day when they're back from the summer holidays. Well, 3 days later, the advance polls open. And then a day after that is the deadline for having your mail-in ballots in. It's going to be incredibly quick and challenging for you.
Absolutely. So here's a great points that you brought up on the 2015 election. So on the 2015 election, Harper kept his base, the majority of his base that he had statistically on his voter turnout that voted for Conservatives. What Trudeau did different was he brought out a lot of young people, like you said. And, you know, those are his promises, speculation on his marijuana legalization, some of the things that he wanted to do differently, which brought out a lot of first-time voters. So now in this election, you're right. What we see with Conservative traditional voters, they donate. That's why the Conservative Party always fundraises all the other parties, because Conservative voters they vote, they donate, they volunteer. It's just part of what they do in terms of a grassroots movement. What we find with the other parties that have been attracting new voters, as well as different ethnic communities, or based on what their policies are, that's not going to be as consistent because they're usually newer to voting or newer to politics. So yes, that's a really good point. Now we have to also point out that Jagmeet Singh is doing a lot better, given that he now has like 700,000 TikTok followers with the young community, right? So he's got a young.
Do you think that young vote's going to go to Jagmeet?
It's a high speculation. Yes. I mean, I've been watching him on TikTok. I've been watching what he does. And if you read the comments, I mean, he has made a way of putting out political issues in a fun, catchy 6-second video, right? And it's
6 seconds.
short, it's quick, it's 6 seconds, and you know, and he's creative with it, and now I see, you know, the method behind it all and the strategy, right? And of course, their policies are attractive to people who are starting out, you know, into the world after school and in this, you know, challenging economic times. But you did say something. You said advanced polls, those 4 days. Yes, that's a challenge. And now what we want to be mindful of is those mail-in ballots that we keep talking about. Elections Canada cannot actually open those mail-in ballots until when the polls close on September 20th. So it could be that we're counting votes for like days after September 20th to figure out, you know.
Oh my God, it's going to be like the US election that we just don't know the answer for a couple of days. We're chatting with Ramona Singh right now. She's a political activist. She's run for politics. She's worked in Doug Ford's office. She's runs for the last decade a firm that specializes in voter identification through telephone polling. She knows what it's like to actually get out there and run a campaign. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Ramona in just a minute. Stay with us. Good evening and welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Ramona Singh. She runs a telecommunications company that does polling, does voter identification, helps candidates get people identified as liberal or conservative or NDP or Green. And then for the party she works for, she tries to figure out a way to get you to go out to the polls and actually vote. And we're chatting about the challenges that we're going to have this election. Ramona, I remember having dinner with you, and we talked about your campaign, your potential campaign, and we talked about the issue at the time was Andrew Scheer who was the leader of the Conservative Party at the time, had to attract ethnic voters in the 905 if he was going to be successful. And my assessment is that he failed in that regard. You know, in all of Mississauga and Brampton, as you probably know, and frankly, even Halton, Oakville and Burlington and Milton, the Conservatives didn't win one seat, not one seat. The only seat they won in Peel was up in Caledon. And that was even when the Conservatives kept the majority government away from the Liberals. So the Conservatives did okay in that election. They actually won the popular vote across the country, but they didn't win the 905. You ran in the 905. What does Erin O'Toole and today's Conservative Party need to do to win seats in the 905, in Brampton, in Mississauga, in Halton?
Great question. We actually did also lose a seat. We lost Lisa Raitt, the deputy leader at the time, in Milton. So that was also, you know, heartbreaking to see that happen. You're right, in the GTA 905s, we didn't have the turnout that we'd hoped to. We did keep the 3 seats that we had. And of course, the current leader, Erin O'Toole, he's also in a 905 seat. So what does the Conservatives have to do? So today, actually, we saw that Trudeau and Erin O'Toole were also in the 905. So they were also in Aurora and Richmond Hill and Markham, those areas that actually seem to go between the two parties by just a few hundred votes up to 1,000 votes. And what you could, it comes down to actually get out the vote when it's so close, when, you know, a party wins in those seats by, you know, in Richmond Hill, 250 votes, in Vaughan, 1,000 votes. It's really the get out the vote strategy, because that means the voter base is there. You have them. You need to make sure that you're doing all your efforts. So what I tell candidates are, you know what, if you're going to spend money, make sure now, if you can't get volunteers or enough of them, pay for canvassers, pay for calls, pay for what you need to do to make sure you get those people out to vote. Now, how can they win seats?
Okay, but hold on a second here. Hold on a second. Paying for canvassers and paying for calls only identifies the vote. How do you then get them out? You got to identify them first, then you got to get them out.
Yes, you get them out a couple of ways. you're doing door knockers, right? Those, you know how you get up on election day or advanced polls, and on your door there's a hanger with a sign on it on where to vote, like the polling location, what you need to take, like what ID you need to take, what time it's open till. So you need to make sure that's at those doors. You're going to knock on those doors and you're going to say, hey, did you vote? And you're going to give them the card. If they didn't open up, you're going to put it on their door hanger. You're going to make calls to those homes, right? You're going to make calls. You're going to go knock on doors. You're going to leave them those reminders. And every day, so those 4 days on advanced polls, every day, Election Canada will give each campaign a list of people who voted. So what you do with that list is you run it through your database, because now you've identified your supporters, right? Let's just say you have 15,000 supporters you want to get out on advanced polls, right? On day one, you get that list of people who voted, and maybe when you run it through your system, you see that, oh, 2,000 of them voted. So what do you do now? You leave those 2,000 alone and you focus on the rest, and you do that every day. So you need to have a captain, a person, a director who's running your get out the vote strategy, who's making those pamphlets, putting those stickers on for each poll, counting them, making sure they're correct, making those labels and giving it out to the volunteers and the ground people to make sure they get out and knock on their doors and call them and
Ramona,
call them, leave them messages any way you can.
Ramona, what you just described is typical, identify and get out the vote strategy, and I agree with it. But I want to ask you two questions. Number one, how is that different in a pandemic? And what are you going to have to do differently to win in a pandemic when you know there's going to be some resistance, if not a lot of resistance, to getting out and actually going on election day and voting? And number two, and more importantly, I think, is it different with the ethnic communities in the 905? Like, do you have to do something different to win if you're a conservative when you know you have to get ethnic communities in the 905 that didn't vote for you in the past?
Yeah, so absolutely. I find that, ethnic communities voted for us when we had a majority win in 2011. So it's not that ethnic communities do not vote conservative. If anything, I find that when it comes to actual views, a lot of ethnic communities and religious communities are very conservative in terms of their outlook on things, right? They're socially or socially conservative, they're fiscally conservative when it comes to family, when it comes to the majority of them are business owners as immigrants who have come here and have now, not been able to practice their occupation back home, and they've opened up a business. So they're fiscally conservative, very, very money minded, and you can have those conversations, right? Where things diverge is sometimes based on what community it is and based on foreign policy, for example, or if you've done a good enough job in terms of having people on your campaign who speak their language, if you do not speak the language, right, to be able to communicate those issues. So yes, when there is resistance to go vote, then you're going to have to really figure out what those issues are in those demographics and make sure when you're calling them to urge them to vote, you're reminding them when your vote means we can work on X, Y issue.
Isn't there something more? Jason Kenney, when he was in federal politics, for some reason did an incredibly good job of reaching out to and connecting with ethnic communities in the 905. And frankly, Patrick Brown, the current mayor of Brampton, when he was involved in provincial politics and federal politics before that, but when he was running for and was the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario, did an incredibly good job of reaching out to and connecting with ethnic communities, and frankly is probably still doing it today as mayor of Brampton. Andrew Scheer just didn't. He did not resonate with ethnic communities in 905. So what about Aaron O'Toole? What do you think, if you were advising Aaron O'Toole and you knew you had to win the 905 and you knew that ethnic communities were going to be the difference, what would you tell him to do?
I would tell him to talk about the issues, put out policy platform that matters to those specific communities. And you know what, the issues that matter to them have been consistent. We've seen throughout the many years on various issues, and that's how I would communicate it. But you know what? I have to say, for Aaron O'Toole or any of the other leaders that are new and, incumbent leaders, it's been challenging to get their message out during a COVID time. They can't get airtime prior to the writ being called, prior to this election, getting, media attention, having the prime minister and the ministers, for the COVID task out on news conferences every day. We've really been just watching the news and trying to understand what we're supposed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So these leaders have not had a chance to do the events the same way other leaders will get a chance to do, the way they would get to tour the country and meet people face to face. And now it's been a new way of campaigning via Zoom, and rallies now are just 50 people in an auditorium with 2 meters apart. So it's a very different type of campaign, right? And it's a new era altogether when it comes to, you know, political campaigning and rallying and all of that election buzz. So, you know, I see that they're doing a good job trying to navigate. And what I would hope is it's going to be during the debates, right? We're going to see the leaders perform. There's going to be 2 debates before the election's called. Like you said, it's a short election. It's the minimum time. But I think that's going to help all the undecided voters to see how articulate each leader is, what their vision is, not just for the COVID period, but what's post-COVID, right? What does the economic recovery look like? And one thing I think I really want to raise is that COVID took us to the information age very fast, right? We've left the industrial age, right? So we have a lot of people who need to skills up. What does that plan look like, right? How do you get people now to be able to be computer savvy and in this AI rich world? And look at us, like traditionally, if this was 2 years ago, I would be sitting there doing the interview. Now we can do it over Zoom. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we don't leave people behind as well.
So let me challenge you on Aaron O'Toole just for a second. You know, he's the Conservative Party is asking anyone that wants to go on the tour to confirm that they've had 2 vaccines. He's wearing a mask. They're having socially distanced rallies and limited capacity rallies, as you say. Trump had a different strategy in the United States. Didn't wear a mask. He had huge rallies. It was almost as if COVID didn't exist, but you know, he obviously got it and got through it. But there's a certain segment of society that actually congratulated him for that and thought it was strong and that he had backbone, that he was a rock star because of his attitude. Why isn't Aaron O'Toole playing that tune? Why isn't Aaron O'Toole having big rallies, not wearing a mask, appealing to the anti-vax groups?
Well, I think he's always had a stance on the fact that, you know, vaccinations are available and people should go and get vaccinated if they can, because, you know, for all the many reasons that we've been told. So yeah, but what you see different now for his stances, so he's going to, of course, you know, practice. He got COVID himself early on. As soon as he became leader, him and his wife got, you know, COVID, and they had to, you know, self-isolate and quarantine for a while. So yeah, so he's going to play, you know, safe with as he's canvassing and going through the country. He's going to wear his mask and the people on the plane as well. But if you notice, he's also taking the stance that he's not enforcing that his candidates must be vaccinated as the other parties are, right? So you have the balance there, right? Where he's going to be safe and so he's not an anti-vaxxer and he's not a COVID denier. But yeah, that's where you have the difference there.
He came out on the first day of the campaign with a magazine that was almost like the old Big Red Book from the Kretzer era. He looked fantastic and buff with the huge muscles on the front page. It was a list of programs and policies that would make a Liberal proud. And I was surprised, didn't even talk about deficit reduction for 10 years, which would make any fiscal conservative, shudder. What do you think about that?
I think what Aaron O'Toole's Conservative Party is doing right now is that they are talking to relevant to the times now, right? I mean, what we saw happen in 2020 with COVID and this year, and you know the debt that this country has ran and the aid that it had to put out so fast that we've never seen anything like it since World War II. I think that the platform is relevant to today because for so long I find that we had the Margaret Thatcher sort of conservatism where, balanced budget and small government and let the market dictate. And, that was great for when it worked. And now you're seeing that it's different times, right? And and he's being realistic. Is it possible now to, balance the books in the next, term, right? So I think there's a little bit of predictability, and in terms of, allowing people to understand what this looks like, what we're in for the next decade, to get out of what we've actually just experienced economically, actually.
So you agree with this policy booklet that he put forward, and the plan to create 1 million jobs, spend money, and not reduce the deficit for 10 years, and you think it's right for the times?
Well, it is right for the times, because the goal is to reduce the deficit eventually, right? But you can't say that it's going to happen in the next 4 years, given that we're not even sure what's going to happen with the economy next year, right? Like what we've seen with the housing prices and what we've seen with the stock market, what we've seen with businesses open and close, it's very unpredictable times. And I guess right now is not the time to talk about, balancing the books in such a short period of time, given that, like, look at the kind of a budget that we were running and the kind of debt and deficit that we've been running. So what does that mean, right? So we got to balance that out in a longer period of time than a short period of time, because we'll feel it if we do it in one term.
The issues that were prevalent during the last election were social conservative issues that Andrew Scheer was supportive of, that weren't very popular around the 905. One of the big bills that the Conservatives blocked in the last campaign was an anti-conversion practice bill, which was a practice where certain institutions would try to get gay people, homosexual people to conversion therapy. It was to not convert them out of their homosexuality, I guess. And the Conservatives voted against that bill. Do you think that'll play well with Conservatives, or will it play poorly with Conservatives?
So here's the thing. I mean, I can't speak to that because I didn't vote for that. And me personally, my views are I don't agree with conversion therapy. So that's my personal view. How it's going to play with people, I think, quite honestly, that's up to the voters, and that they're going to decide when it comes to chances like now on elections, right? And I'm going to tell you, no party's perfect, right? You're never going to find the perfect party with the perfect policies and the perfect platform. But what you got to do at the end of the day is kind of look at each party and see what they're putting out there, what they want to do. Look at their track record, on their consistency, on what's important to them, because each party has a theme.
Okay, so let's talk track record.
Yeah.
So climate change and carbon tax were something that the Conservatives under Stephen Harper and under Scheer were consistently against a carbon tax. Doug Ford is vehement in his opposition to a carbon tax, and Aaron O'Toole surprised everyone after the last Conservative Party policy convention and came out in support of carbon tax, and declaring that he was not a climate change denier, which some people were frankly surprised at for a Conservative leader. Is that going to play well with Conservatives? Is that going to help him or hurt him?
I think that when it comes to Conservatives, I don't think they want Trudeau back, right? And so again, you got to weigh your options, right? Like there's certain things you may not like, and there's certain things that are more important to you. And what's more important to you? You have the Western Canada, like when it comes to Alberta, right? Like, the kind of legislation that has been passed that has, hurt their economy for so long. Of course, they're going to vote for a Conservative leader, right? So you got to balance that out as well. So, and that's to be seen, right? Like this is the most unpredictable election, because I think the polls speculated for a very long time that Trudeau might get a majority. And now that he's called the election, people are pissed off. They're saying, well, why are you doing this? And it took Jagmeet Singh to say, hey, we've been voting with you. We've kept Parliament going. Why are you stopping this now, right? On the onset of a fourth wave and schools opening and us not sure what's gonna happen with the Delta variant. So I think all those factors right now, it's about the scale, right? What's important? Who do you not want? And traditionally people vote against someone. They don't vote for someone, right? So true to example, in that 2018 election, people voted against Kathleen Wynne, right? When it came to the Ontario provincial election. What you saw in America, that people voted against Donald Trump. They were not excited about Biden, right? So again, now we're going to see, are they going to vote against Trudeau because they don't want him back? So there's those factors as well that you have to consider.
We're chatting with Ramona Singh, a conservative pollster and telephone get out the vote and identifier expert, someone who's worked in Doug Ford's office, someone who was a candidate for the Conservative Party, and a very smart young lady. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Ramona in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A real pleasure of mine to be chatting tonight with Ramona Singh, who's a very impressive young lady. She, for 10 years, has run this company that get outs the vote and identifies the vote through telephone polling and contacts. She has worked in the leader's office as a communications expert at Queen's Park. She was a candidate in the last election for the Conservatives federally. She's got both an undergraduate degree and a diploma. She's obviously, she's been standing up to all my questions on policy issues, so she knows what she's talking about. So Ramona, you're the type of person that we actually need running. How come you're not running?
Great question. And I've had a lot of people ask me, I felt that I just finished running. And it was just so recent. Had this election been, in the 4-year term, I would have been more ready. So I was a candidate for 1.5 years. That's a very long period of time. I would not advise anybody to do such a long period campaign. So if you can imagine 1.5 years when you are in the community, meeting people, knocking on doors, going, and in Brampton, you have 10 events a day, maybe on the minimum. So as you're and it's such an engaging community, right? So as you're doing all that, what's happening is your business is slowing down, right? Or your career or your work, your friends, your social circle, your family, literally everything goes on hold. So for me, it was just not the right time because I'm just still getting out of that recovery of getting back on track, right? After such a long period of time, putting everything on hold.
What riding did you run in?
I ran in Brampton East.
And who's running there this time?
Right now, it's for the Conservatives with Neville Bajaj. He was a previous candidate in 2015. I believe the incumbent, Maninder Sidhu, the MP, he should be running. And I'm not sure who the NDP candidate is. I'm not sure if it's been announced yet. And
what were the results? How close did you come last time? Do you remember?
Oh, I came in third. So I came, yeah. So the Liberals won. And the NDP came in second, and I was like just right after the NDP. Yeah, just I think 1,000 different votes after them. But so yeah, it was a big difference. It was a big difference from the MP candidate.
And so, what do you think the candidate's going to need to do in Brampton East to win this time?
It's all about. You got to look at the last few elections. You see where your voter turnouts are, where we have done well in specific polls. You make sure you have those votes still, that they have not changed their mind since the last election. And then you got to go find some more. And here's the thing. Statistically, local candidates are worth 5% of the vote. 95% is the leader, right? Is the national campaign. So what you're responsible for is those few thousand votes that you can get out. That's the best you can do. Now, a superstar candidate, like I'm talking about somebody, who's on TV and is a superstar and well-known, yeah, maybe they'll be worth about 7 to 9%, but you got to be very realistic about what your impact is at the end of the day. And the rest is on the national campaign and what the media covers and what those debates look like in those last 2 weeks.
The NDP did well because of Jagmeet Singh last time. With him running in Vancouver, not in Brampton, what do you think the result's going to be this time?
I think that, we talked about his followers on social media. Now we have to see if followers on social media will translate to votes, at the ballot box. That's to be seen. But now, what we saw in 2015 for the NDP at the time was when there was the movement that they did, the base that did not want to vote for Harper at the time. they were given in their votes for the NDP to vote for Liberal because they didn't want to split the vote on the left. So now they're speculating that if the Conservative numbers don't pick up, and I think it will, then people who are NDP will vote for NDP. So Liberals, they had to prop up because they got a lot of NDP votes in the last 2 elections. So now if they don't have that as well, and the votes being split, now you can see Trudeau is actually now attacking Jagmeet Singh, right? Now he's acknowledging him, whereas in the last election, he was not doing that very much.
Yeah, well, it's in the 2011 election, the Conservative vote, even though the Conservatives won a majority, the Conservative vote didn't go up in 905 that much. What happened is the NDP vote went up dramatically, stealing votes from the Liberals, allowing the splits to occur. And in 2011, in Mississauga, I don't know what the result was in Brampton, but in Mississauga, every single seat, I believe, went Conservative, which led to a Conservative majority. In 2008, it was half and half, and that was a minority Conservative. So when Conservatives win half the votes, half the seats in the 905 or in Mississauga and Brampton, they can win a minority. But if the NDP does really well and the Liberals therefore lose on the splits, Conservatives can win a majority.
Absolutely. So that's something to watch out for, because the Conservatives are not splitting the vote with anybody else. The People's Party, it was a factor in the last election. It's less of a factor now. They have 0 seats in Parliament. So the Conservatives are on their own on the right. So it's the left where you're going to see on a daily basis where Jagmeet Singh and Trudeau are going to be, trying to debate on the same issues and who's going to do more on the same stuff, right? So that's why you see the Conservatives are different in terms of their messaging and their policy. So now it's up to the voter to see which side is better for them and weigh out those options. Absolutely. But those are all statistical things to be mindful of, and given the voter turnout, because Conservative voters are, very hardcore, diehard voters. They come out and vote. They donate. They, like you see the numbers all the time. So what does that mean for the voters, for those 2 parties on the left if it's a low voter turnout?
You're supportive of
NDP votes work.
You're supportive of climate change. You're supportive of vaccines and vaccine mandates or passports. You're supportive of you're not in support of conversion therapy. You're extremely articulate. You appear sort of urban oriented. Why are you conservative?
I'm a fiscal conservative. So yeah,
you told me that this is not the right time for fiscal conservatism.
No, what I said to you is that saying let the people know, Canadians know, that balancing the budget is not going to be in the next 4 years. It's going to be in 2 terms versus 1 term is a more realistic projection. I'm a realist at the end of the day as well, right? And given the 2 years that we just had, and the budget we ran and the debt we run, we got to be very logical about what the likelihood is, and to make sure for balancing the budget, it's got to be done in a way where it's not going to, there isn't going to be massive cuts just so we hit a target, right? So I'm also a realist at the end of the day,
so
and
you're
a good measure.
Conservative, and that's why you're a conservative.
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you always been conservative?
Sorry?
Have you always been supportive of the Conservative Party?
Yes. So interestingly enough, when I decided to be politically active, I don't come from a political family. My career background was actually, I started in law enforcement. I worked at Corrections Canada at national headquarters in Ottawa. Then I was in telecoms and in business. So when I started getting active in politics, I actually took a quiz. I did. I studied all the parties. I looked at their constitution, the platform, and I took those quizzes to see where, and consistently, that's what I identified with. And so it was a very mindful decision going down the path. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be the first one to say, you're not going to like everything the party you support is going to put out there, right? But you're going to balance it out in terms of which lane you fit in most, right? And that's the reality of it.
So what's your prediction? What's going to happen?
I don't know. We don't know. Elections matter. It's only been like 3 days. We still have another 32 days left. So anything could happen, right? Like you can't take it for granted, right? Right now, vaccinations have been an issue. Afghanistan has been, an issue. Like what's happening there is devastating, and I think that's taking a lot of, the conversation that's happening between people. So this is a different election, right? And we talked about all the different changes, like the fact that Elections Canada is going to be running an election that's going to be $100 million more expensive than a usual election, right? So there's so many factors. I don't know. I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I could predict, but day to day things are changing. And you know what? That's the beauty of politics, honestly.
So if the Conservatives win a majority, they've got to win 51 seats. Can they win 51 seats?
Is it doable? Let's see in the next few days. I see strategically that the leaders are going places that have been very close in margin, and now there's a lot of swing seats, right? Like what you said happened in Mississauga and Brampton's, right? They went Conservative in 2011, right? So there are some bellwether ridings that will go either way based on the messaging. And you know what? I'm not gonna. And one thing I'll say about like ethnic communities is ethnic media is a factor, right? Because people watch their ITV, listen to their ethnic radio and TV stations, and their interpretation of what's going on is also actually a factor as well, right? I think political parties have been becoming a lot more mindful because they're, going on air and doing interviews and making sure that they're reaching out to those communities as well.
What are some of the ridings and candidates that you think we should really be watching in Mississauga, Brampton, 905?
I think that all those seats, it's going to be very difficult because here you have a lot of incumbents running and a lot of, and you know what, the great thing about Brampton, I can speak for, is that they're very active. They're very in tune with politics. They have their thumb on the pulse of what's going on, and they will actually measure what has their incumbent MP accomplished, right? Somewhere like Brampton that has highest rates of all various different things and has been at a disadvantage at every level of government for a very long time, does question their incumbent MP. So don't be surprised if there is some movement around there as well.
So
because they want their public
some of the Conservative candidates in Brampton and what you think of them and what the chances are.
We'd have to take a look at the numbers, but I would say that Brampton Centre has always been one of the seats that could go either way.
Brampton Centre?
The candidate in Brampton Centre is Jagmeet Singh, and you just have a Liberal candidate that's been nominated because the incumbent has stepped down, Ramesh Sangha. But as you see, like provincially, it's NDP. Federally, before in 2011, it was Conservative. In 2015, he went Liberal. So it can go in any direction, right? So there's all that. I find that, of course, anything from Highway 50 East, right, when you go to Vaughan, those are all very close. So let's see if it affects Brampton East. The riding that I ran in, what that means because it's situated right in between. But there are pockets. There's pockets of voters and supporters, and it's about begging them to come out and vote. It's all about begging them to come out.
We're chatting with Ramona Singh tonight. She's a Conservative strategist. She runs a company that specializes in telephone polls and get out the vote and identify the vote. She ran in the federal election 2 years ago, not running regrettably this time, so we don't get a chance to vote for her this time, but we're going to be seeing her again. I count my words. She's got a good future, a great future in politics in the future. We're going to take a last break, and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a fun chat with Ramona Singh right now. She's runs a company that specializes in telephone IDing voters during election campaigns and getting out the vote, polling. She also has run previously in a federal election, in the last election in Brampton East, and I think she's going to be running again in the future. We got a couple minutes left. Let me just throw out some issues for you, if I could. Vaccine passports. Do you agree with vaccine passports?
I do agree with it for when you want to travel, because other countries have now started them, and it is an issue if you do want to travel, if you travel for work, even not just pleasure. So we do need some sort of identification. I mean, I traveled and I had to take print out,
What if
my.
what if hockey rinks and big concerts and churches and schools and restaurants start demanding proof of vaccination before they let you in? Do you agree with that?
What we're seeing in New York City, I think more cities might take that on, because the burden that the shutdowns, the burdens had on business and the revenue loss. Yes, there was aid out to those businesses, but business is for profit, right? And just to be able to pay your rent or to be able to pay your hydro bill is not for profit, right? So these businesses have suffered so much that, open up, close down, them getting staff on board, buying their equipment and food and necessities and supplies to be able to open doors. Do you remember they built out outdoor patios and, heat lamps and everything else, and they had to shut down over and over again. So I do think that for a business owner, it's really their onus. If they want to keep their doors open and they want to serve customers who are vaccinated, that's up to the business. And I'm a small business owner. I support the business community, and they've been through a lot, and it's up to them who they can serve. And if they can justify losing a percentage of their revenue because they want to have people who are vaccinated in their facility, then that's up to them, and that's up to their own projections and overhead.
A lot of social conservatives supported conversion therapy. You said you don't. What about gay marriage? Do you support gay marriage?
I do, absolutely. I don't think my views are my own. I think people have the right to love and be in love and what they want to do in their own homes, in their own time. And I believe that the place for government. So I have to say, the reason my views are such is because I'm half Indian, half Iranian. I was born in Tehran, Iran. I lived there until the Gulf War. So I got to see firsthand what kind of government and how they run government if it comes to very socially conservative views. And what that means for society, right? So for me personally, and I saw war, right? So I understand that politicians actually do impact your life, and which is actually what got me really involved, right? Because I understood that at the end of the day, when you look back at your life on your deathbed, your quality of life, your happiness, your sense of security, your purpose, all of that comes down to the land you lived in. If you live in a great country like Canada where you have freedom, then you had probably a better quality of life and happiness and everything else at your disposal. What you saw in the images relate just a few days ago, and in Afghanistan, when that flight was taken off, that plane was taking off, and people just hanging on to the wings because they needed to get to a place of safety. When you have that, and you look back at your life and you have all the restrictions and everything else. So for me personally,
the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan this week. Canada pulled out, a decade ago, effectively left in some training people. Was that a mistake? Should we? Should NATO? Should the West have stayed in Afghanistan longer?
Well, that's now on debate, right? Because I think the question now is how they pulled out. It wasn't that they should stay there forever, but was it done effectively the way it was done? Because I don't think anybody realized in such a short period of time that the country would be taken over, right, as soon as they pull out. So what was that method? And did they not? I mean, I don't believe that there wasn't enough intelligence to know what was happening on the ground, that if you do remove troops immediately this way, what would happen? There's always intelligence, right? So who made that decision? Why was it done? Why was the intelligence ignored? I think that's going to be seen in the next little while, because it's an issue. And I think now, after 2020 and the movements we've had with Black Lives Matter and everybody being more in tune, and actually, I think it was the first time we acknowledged how much politicians affect your life when they can say open, close, this is allowed, that's not allowed. People started asking questions. People started taking a look at what their rights are, what the laws say. And I think this is not something that we're going to let go of, or we're going to, turn a blind eye to and say, oh, it's not my problem. I think it's now become a global problem. And I think we're going to get some answers soon.
Ramona Singh, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'd have a great time.
If people want to access your company's telecommunications, telephone, polling services, do you have a website that they should go to?
I do. So please go to globacon.ca. That's GLOBACON. Or you can call me. My phone number is super easy, and it's one of the services I actually do sell with VIP numbers. It's 647-400-7000. And or you can email me at ramona@globacon.ca. But give me a call, send me a text, 647-400-7000.
Ramona Singh, we're going to be seeing you again running for politics. I know it. Good luck.
I know it too.
Well, that's our show for today, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to be interviewing a bunch of different people in the next short couple of weeks on this federal campaign to find out what people think, and not just candidates, but people like Ramona that have got a point of view that really is quite interesting. And I do think that we need people like Ramona Singh running for politics. I think too many people that are running for politics are career politicians that don't really add that much to Parliament. And I think when there's people that have got such entrepreneurial experience and such personal experience, they really add to what an MP does on the House of Commons floor and in their committee meetings and in cabinet if they get there, etc. And so we need more people like Ramona Singh, even if some of her fiscal conservative policies. Actually, you know, what's interesting is you go through all the list of issues, you're as socially progressive as I am, and I'm a fiscal conservative as well. So I'm not sure why I'm in one party and you're in another, but that's a whole different story for a dinner table conversation sometime. Thanks. Good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.